Hello and welcome to our first episode number 1 of Three Pastors Walk Into a Bar. Richard, would you care to elaborate on why we called it that?
Yeah, when we originally thought of how we could get together as pastors and address those issues that one might not normally get to talk about in a church that normally most people have questions about, we thought, well, what if the three of us walked into a bar and had that conversation? And so that's what we're looking to do is have those conversations, have those topics that you would find if us three gentlemen walked into a bar.
That sounds like it would be dangerous. Anyways, this is episode number 1. So I am here today with Greg Berry, our associate pastor here at Athol Baptist Church.
Good afternoon.
Also Richard Alderson, our other associate pastor, soon to be ordained here very shortly. And then I am Christopher Antone, senior pastor at Athol Baptist Church. We're also here with Gavin Antone, who's running our sound for us, and so we appreciate him putting in the effort to make this happen. And so, the idea of three pastors walk into a bar, I think is an interesting concept. Actually, when you first came up with the name, I don't even think we took it seriously. It was just like,
no,
I think it was a joke, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a complete joke. It was supposed to be like the beginning of a joke. So three pastors walked into a bar, and then
add punchline here, right?
Exactly.
Similar to the three Irishmen that walked past the bar. It could happen.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. That doesn't even seem like a real thing. Yeah. So I think the concept, like you were saying, is like, what would happen if like three pastors walked into a conversation about X, Y, or Z, and then how would that look as you transitioned from a kind of secular topic and turned it into a more theological discussion. I think is kind of what the heart of it was really all about. And so I don't know. What would you say that's a fair assumption, Greg?
Yeah. I would say that we often, because of our position, end up getting questions. In fact, we even have it on our connection card that, ask the pastor. And these are we're hoping to get topics and ideas that would not necessarily come up in a church setting. Be able to discuss those in a fashion outside of how you would say that, a church regimented discussion.
Yeah.
And I think part of the vision as well as looking to engage those who would normally not come into a church.
Yeah.
The atheist, the Buddhist, whatever worldview that would be, whomever we would meet in a bar, and not that would be the person to be a bar to stereotype.
You saying that's where all Buddhists are found is in bars? Is that?
By no means what I'm saying. I'm just saying that those that normally wouldn't come into a church, we're looking to engage, and we're looking to have those guests. So if you find yourself listening to this podcast and you'd like to come visit us and express your disdain for the Christian worldview, or just have a gentlemanly, courteous conversation and be in opposition, we would love to hear from you, see if it would work out for the aim of this podcast is to have other perspectives and to be able to have a courteous conversation about that.
Something that's severely lacking in our society today is the ability to have a calm, decent conversation about whatever, especially things that are like hot topic issues in our society today. Which there's a lot of them. When we were thinking about what we were going to talk about today, it's like, where do you even begin? There's so much to talk about. But then Richard had mentioned the idea of social justice and how social justice relates to the life of the believer, to Christianity in general, and does it have a place? And one of the things that we will always do here before we go into anything else is we'll define terms, because that's one of the key things about discourse in today's society is I think that there's just a misunderstanding about terminology, or there is a vast taking over of semantics from different groups. And so, one group defines it one way, another group defines it another way, another group defines it another way. So that's kind of what I discovered as I was looking through like websites trying to figure out, what is social justice. I mean, I found literally 1,000 websites with a definition for social justice, and all of them had some things in common, but not all of them looked at it from the same perspective. It was very vast, the way that people looked at it. So I think I started from what Oxford Dictionary defined it as: social justice, justice in terms of distribution of wealth, opportunities, and privileges within a society, which I think is the baseline kind of definition for what social justice is. But then if you begin to look at like other organizations, like the Heritage Foundation has a definition for social justice on their website, which has a little bit more of a conservative bent toward it, and kind of gives a little bit of history where social justice comes from. It's not a new concept, which is something that I found pretty interesting. It's not like something that somebody just thought up like yesterday. I mean, according to this, it's been around since the 1840s. And even before that, it was around earlier than that in some of the theological writings of some philosophers that came along before even what we would even consider a modern definition of that being. And I hadn't written that down somewhere, and I can't find it now, but I know that even in the Federalist Papers, it was addressed in the Federalist Papers as early as 1780. And so it's not a new concept, but I think that the way that we perceive it probably has changed quite a bit over time.
And I think if I can jump in, I think one of the challenges with defining social justice is it's kind of nebulous. Like you mentioned, there's no strict outline for it. And I think that enables certain entities to use it. And that's why they brought up this topic, is trying to keep believers from falling under the facade of becoming a warrior for social justice. Because I think it was Prager University I saw, and they had mentioned that social justice was something that everybody must argue for, but that which nobody can argue against. And I thought that was pretty thought-provoking, because that's how they use it. It's like no one can define it. Everybody should be arguing for social justice. I mean, it just sounds like something we should fight for, right, even though nobody knows what it is. But it's definitely, you don't want to be the person who says, oh, it's not, you shouldn't fight for social justice. And I think that's the insidious nature of that buzzword right now.
Yeah, for sure. There was a couple of different places that I had seen the definition of it kind of laid out. And I love the abstract that the Heritage Foundation put in here. It read like this, and this is directly from their website, heritage.org. For its proponents, social justice is usually undefined. Originally a Catholic term, first used about 1840 for a new kind of virtue or habit necessary for post-agrarian societies. The term has been bent by secular progressive thinkers to mean uniform state distribution of society's advantages and disadvantages. Social justice is really the capacity to organize with others to accomplish ends that benefit the whole community. If people are to live free of state control, they must possess this new virtue of cooperation and association. This is one of the great skills of Americans and ultimately the best defense against statism. And so I think that kind of lays out pretty good where the idea of social justice is today. it's divided pretty evenly among party lines. I mean, if you have leftists and rightists and everywhere in between, but for the most part, conservative people view social justice as an innate negative in today's society, whereas people who are more left-leaning view it as a positive. And it taken as like just the idea of it being social justice, the search for equity. This is something that Christians would be a proponent of, is people being treated equitably in society. And if the definition is justice in terms of just distribution of wealth, opportunities, privileges within a society, then that does not meet into terms with the idea of biblical equity, I would say. It's more forced equity. Which is where a lot of people, I think, see social justice today, is we're going to make everyone equal.
Yeah, and I think that also looking up justice itself, apart from the social part of that, according to Wikipedia here, it says, in its broadest sense, justice in its broadest sense is the principle that people receive that which they deserve, with the interpretation of what then constitutes deserving being impacted upon by numerous fields with many different viewpoints and perspective, including the concepts of moral, which you had mentioned, Chris, as far as the Bible, correctness based on ethics, rationality, law, religion, equity, and fairness. And I think, as we look at those, that aspect of quote unquote social justice, I can't help but think of grace and mercy come into play there, in that we have, as Christians, we have an obligation to look at other people in a fashion that is equitable to them, socially just, and grace and mercy. Grace, getting what we don't deserve, salvation, eternal life with Christ, and mercy, not getting what we do deserve, and that is hell and damnation. And we need, as pastors and as Christians, followers of Christ, to be able to portray that and present that in our thoughts on social justice.
But I still think we need to define, because a lot of what you just said there, Pastor Greg, is very flowery, but we're still skirting the clear definition, because I would argue that social justice is not something that the Christian community needs to get on board with. And so I think that's where we get duped as believers, because the two terms taken together, that sounds like it should be. You're exactly right. It sounds like something we should be doing. We should be fighting for social justice. Absolutely, right? Mm-hmm. There's no difference between the Greek barbarian, there's no difference from the poor, the rich. Like, we don't get favoritism. We're not racist. I mean, that's the foundation of what Christianity is. We're all equal before God, right? But that is not what social justice encompasses. I mean, you mentioned justice. I would say I heard justice is about truth, right? Mm-hmm. So if a guy commits a crime, justice is he's either innocent or he's guilty. Social justice is, why did he commit that crime? Was he abused? Is he part of a certain demographic? Is it? And then to take that into account and then determine his guilt or innocence based off of the factors, vice, straight innocence, and guilt, the truth of the matter. Again, I had read, it said, justice is getting what you deserve without favor, whereas social justice is getting what you don't deserve because you are favored.
Well, that would definitely fall in line with the whole concept of identity politics,
right.
And as far as if you are a victimized class or a victimized race, then you are due some fairness through social justice inequities being addressed. that kind of goes into, really the meat of what we're talking about. If we're really going to get down into this, we got to address the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is that social justice does not necessarily mean equity, because if you begin to focus, and I think it's the Wikipedia definition that talks about the idea of egalitarianism, and the concept of distribution of wealth. And there's a couple of problems with that. The first thing is that if you begin to assume that people who are wealthy because of some injustice that they incurred, and that social justice therefore needs to redistribute the wealth that they have to people that were disenfranchised for whatever reason, then you begin to not look at equity at all. That's not equity, that's theft. And so social justice, by its definition, begins to deteriorate just based on the concepts that are left there. So I think one of the problems is that there's just a lot of people out there that are angry about a lot of different things, race and gender, and that's the main thing about this. It's like human rights. Careers.com, which they do a lot of posting for different human rights type careers and NGOs and things like that. But they have 4 principles of social justice that they hold to. First one is human rights. The connection between social justice and human rights has strengthened over the years. It has become clear to activists and governments that one can't exist without the other. When a society is just, it protects and respects everyone's human rights. This connection is essential since human rights are recognized globally. Various treaties help to keep governments accountable. So that makes sense, right? So social justice, equity is tied with human rights. I don't think anybody would argue that. Equity and human rights are totally tied together. The problem is that when you begin to eliminate one person's rights in favor of a person that feels as though they have been victimized or disenfranchised about something.
What's the whole issue with hate speech?
Yeah, that would be a good start. Yeah.
Well, in that definition, you mentioned human rights are recognized worldwide,
and they are not.
They are not.
Yeah, they are not.
So when we're looking at definitions, for the purpose of this discussion, when we say social justice, I think we've all got a little bit of a different idea of, what does that involve? And then if we were to have somebody in here, say on the far left, their idea of social justice would be different from ours.
Right.
But even then, though, I mean, I personally, I'm not a politics guy, and the more we do this, the more that will become apparent, because I will probably say ignorant things when it comes to politics. But to me, the left, the right, is what's the believer? To the believer, what does it mean when we say social justice? How do we define it as pastors so the believer understands this is something they should get behind, or is this something they should be wary of?
Well,
exactly.
And that is where it gets complicated. Because
that's why we're here.
Yeah, and social justice, as I think of it, is exactly what Oxford defined it as. I think that's a very appropriate way to define that. Justice in terms, or equity in terms of distribution of wealth, opportunities, and privileges within a society. So they would like to see an even distribution of wealth, an even distribution of opportunity, and an even distribution of privilege within a society. So that's the way that they would like to see that go down. And I think that is the definition of social justice, no matter how you like to flower it up, or no matter what you would like for it to mean. That is what it is.
But it seems to me that may be the puppet strings people trying to redistribute the wealth, maybe. But it seems to me that the person that goes out picketing, the person that goes out doing that stuff is not, or maybe I just misperceive it. It just doesn't seem to me that they're caring about the redistribution of wealth. They're truly thinking, I'm involved in a fight for some, persecuted class.
Well,
isn't that part of, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that seems to me to be the magic of the draw of social justice is they're saying, hey, you need to come fight for X demographic, Y demographic, persecuted people. You need to get in this picket line and fight for them. Whereas maybe behind the scenes, does that make sense? What I'm trying to get at?
I think that there definitely is a struggle when it comes to race, and I think a lot of that has to do with race. And there definitely is some issues that have to do with race that people do not want to think about, and a lot of these concepts probably will not make me popular in a lot of ways. But I do believe that the black person has been disenfranchised over the last 200 years. I don't think there's any way to argue that. I mean, they're only a couple of hundred years out of being in slavery completely in this society. They're only a few generations removed from not being able to vote, not being able to use the same bathroom as a white person. They're not that many generations removed from from unfair or what they would perceive as being unfair drug laws that unduly unfairly prosecuted, they would say, black people more than white people as far as crack cocaine versus, higher class
Right.
cocaine levels kind of thing. So there has been a long disenfranchisement, and a lot of people are extremely angry about that. And social justice obviously is the flag in which all of that flies under. But let me say this before we move on. I don't think that people talk enough about black leaders and how far they have come in such a very short time. To be in the position that they are in right now in the United States of America, where not too long ago they were in chains and being beaten as chattel. And here they are now, prominent leaders, we've had our first black president. That is an amazing achievement for a race coming out of the persecution that they have come out of. And so I'd like to state that first of all. But that being said, I think that there are inequities that have been done in the past. And I think there is a legitimate argument for what does that look like now, and what does overcoming those inequities look like, and have we overcome those inequities? Are we in a place now where the United States Constitution is living up to the standard by which it was created to uphold? Because it wasn't doing that for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Agree, but I think part of the problem, though, is that this potential labeling as a racist has so many, especially believers, living in absolute terror. And, I personally just refuse to address it. I know I'm not a racist. I have friends with anybody. I've always judged people by who they are. And I think so much of the energy of social justice is driven by people's abject terror of being labeled a racist. And I think we as believers need to just stand on biblical principles. We treat everybody the same. Everybody's afforded the same opportunity to come to Christ. Everybody receives the gospel. We welcome everybody as a brother. And I think that's where part of the issue in the church is drifting into and falling prey to this social justice stuff is we are terrified of being labeled. I mean, here we are as three quote-unquote white gentlemen, even though I'm quarter Mexican and quarter German, and the rest is English and Scottish and all kind of stuff. The biggest mutt there is out there when it comes to racial ethnicity, and yet most people who would look at me would be terrified of getting labeled as a racist. It doesn't bother me at all because I know who I am, and I think that's where as Christians we need to take that stand. And I agree with you that they have, as a race, have done remarkable things, and it's a shame that we are not more vocal about their success and more vocal. And I'm always curious. I mean, hopefully we can have an African American leader up here sometime and ask him, because I've always wondered, like, would you even want race to be an issue? I mean, I think it's Morgan Freeman one time was on a show one time and it was like, don't refer to me that way. Just
I'm not going to call you a white guy.
Yeah.
And you're not going to call me a black man.
Yeah.
We're just going to have a conversation.
yeah. I mean, why do we have to have labels? I mean, that's what I don't understand.
Well,
why do we even need labels?
I was going to say, I think that the majority of black leaders, people that have quote unquote made it, are on the side of not trying to better themselves through laws and through this social justice situation. They're saying the same thing that everybody else is saying. If you want to better yourself, get an education. And anybody can do that in this country. You want to better yourself, work hard at your job. Anybody can do that in this country. There's just a handful of those leaders that are out there perpetrating this social justice situation.
And what you're talking about is equality of opportunity.
Right. We all have it.
Which at the base level, that's what you would think that social justice would seek for would be equality of opportunity. But that's not what it's being promoted at. It's being promoted as equality of outcome. So everybody arrives at the same place through law or through force or through coercion or whatever it takes to get everybody on the same page, as if people who are wealthy are worse than people who are poor, or that people who are poor don't have the same equality as other people, or that they have some type of privilege. And that's a whole nother episode, the whole idea of white privilege. Which I don't think exists. But
you mentioned one thing, Chris, on the Wikipedia, I think it was, or Oxford.
We're going to have a limit on Wikipedia references. It's grating my soul to know.
Okay, this is Oxford. I'm reading from the Oxford, and it says justice in terms of the distribution of wealth, opportunities, and privileges within a society. And you had mentioned the equal, and so it's not necessarily an equal distribution that is just. What is just is if I work harder than you, Richard, then I should deserve more. The outcome
yes and no,
is based on the input.
Not always, though.
How so?
So say I get hired by Apple, and I'm totally making this up, but get hired by Apple, and their stock is booming. And I don't work hard at all, but I'm getting buku. And you get hired by Microsoft, and they're slumping. And I'm working 12 hours a day, and I'm not getting recompensated. I mean, it's just, I understand the principle you're saying, that your
the same opportunity is there.
Outcome or hard work should equal, but in a capitalist-free society, just hard work doesn't always equal outcome even. It's just
exactly, and that's the whole problem with the whole idea of equality of outcome. You're not going to have the same equality of outcome because you're going to have people are going to have different work ethic. People are going to have different jobs. They're going to have different bosses. They're going to have different demographics, different regions, different educational backgrounds. To think that every person should work and then get the same outcome out of the job that they do, in spite of their character, in spite of their personality, in spite of their training level, in spite of what it is that they do for a living, is nonsensical. Any economist would tell you that, but that is exactly what is being promoted in this idea of social justice, which does have its roots in egalitarianism. And egalitarianism, as defined, is moving a society so that everyone is equal. And that's never going to work. It's never going to happen.
So what do you say, Pastor Chris, to the Christian who says, well, shouldn't we be like the Christians in the New Testament times who shared equally and gave all? I mean, are we intrinsically being anti-Christian by being capitalist?
I think that's a brilliant question, because when you think about like Acts chapter 4:32, where it says the multitude of believers was one in heart and soul. No one claimed that any of his possessions was his own, but they shared everything they owned. And the bottom line is that God is the emblem of justice. In Micah 6:8, learn to do good, Seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, and please the widow's cause. Isaiah 1:17, he has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with our God. See, I think the difference is that we, for some reason, we tend to try to tie our theology with our politics. And whereas politics is influenced by theology, politics is downstream of social norms and social activity and theology and everything else goes along with that. You can never turn that around to where politics or theology is downstream of politics, which I think is what's happening with Christians and why it's so confusing for Christians is because we somebody didn't turn their phone off.
Sorry, mine.
Yeah. So I
Win,
think.
place, or show on that one.
Did you win? Did you win?
I did.
What were the odds?
Well, I was wishing my sister a happy birthday. Sorry.
Oh. So you didn't win anything then, basically. That cost you. is what
Also
that
ran.
did. I think that justice is something that is necessary in the life of a believer. But it doesn't necessarily have to equal equality of outcome. Nowhere in Scripture does it say that anybody would come out equally. Although, if you look at the beliefs, this is why home church is funny to me, because.
Well, that's a whole
nother issue, but because
the
the argument is that we're going to do things like the New Testament and we're going to have church in our home like they did in the New Testament. However, none of those people will actually share all of their goods in common.
Right.
That's just not something that's going to happen in a American society. Maybe you have a few groups that have decided that we're going to live in a commune and then we're going to share all of our goods and what's mine is yours and what's yours is mine. Which is the New Testament model of the church, it's just not going to happen in the society that we have today because, I don't know, the hardness of our hearts. I mean, this is a big question when you're talking about justice because, I mean, really, where should we be at as believers? Should we not be sharing all of our goods one with another? Is personal property even a thing in Scripture?
Well,
yes.
That's one of the talking points for social justice is private ownership of land. They don't think that's
well. They certainly want to redistribute the land so
Yeah.
that everybody gets their piece.
Well,
Right?
I think we like to forget the old. I'm not advocating this by any means. And before I forget, if you are a home church advocate and you would like to come on a future episode and argue for home church, please give us a call. We'd love to have that
Yes,
on a future episode.
that would be awesome.
So I think sometimes we forget the Old Testament, and the Old Testament is a reflection of God's character. Though the New Covenant is different in how we relate to God, the Old Testament still reveals God's heart clearly. And you look at Abraham, you look at David, you look at Caleb, you look at all these great heroes of the Old Testament, they are never condemned for their Job. They're never condemned for having possessions and being rich men. I mean Abraham, I forget what the exact Hebraic language is, but it was like heavy in gold, as I think how he was characterized. So it's never, it's like when I was in the Marine Corps and I would have fellow Marines concerned about whether or not their military service was something that was against God's will. And I would always point out, I'm like, Jesus himself blessed a Roman centurion. I mean, has there been a more violent and a more oppressive and a more militaristic regime than the Roman army? I mean, arguably there probably has
But to
been.
be fair, he wasn't blessing him because he was a centurion.
Exactly. But he also, what a chance to say, stop being in the military. I mean, you think that if it would have been against his will, you think that would have been something he would have brought up. I mean, I know it's an argument for silence. It's not something you can hang a hat on. I find that that's very interesting. You look at, I'm getting off topic here, so let me bring it back. So in the Old Testament, you have all these examples of pillars of the faith who were also rich men, And it's not being a rich man that made them happy, but they're never condemned for being rich. Now, they may be condemned for what they did with their wealth. By means, Solomon building all the, amassing all the horses, getting all the wives, etc. But it's not the fact of being rich. I don't think personal property is something that's condemned. I don't think there's anything against that. It's just like you are more blessed, obviously. I mean, 1 Corinthians 13, you can give away all your goods, but so all your goods to feed the poor. But if you don't have love, then it profits you nothing. So I just don't think there's an argument to say that there's an evilness to private property. I mean, because you couldn't have society. I mean, we couldn't have society if there was not private property.
Well, we wouldn't have our society. We would have socialism or communism.
Well, I think that's the utopian, the worldview, the fallen worldview they want you to go for. Let's go for utopia. Give it all away and we can live in this utopia, right?
Well,
Right.
egalitarianism
Yeah.
is basically the driving force behind communism and
Right.
socialism. I mean, that is basically what it's all about, even though all that really means is that everyone else is equally poor while a few people are vastly rich.
Yeah.
That's really all that means.
I mean, doesn't every communist regime, I mean, isn't it truly just an oligarchy where there's, in an oligarchy, by oligarchy, I mean that there's a set of rich,
Leaders
powerful
that are
leaders. So you've got,
controlling it all.
some small segment of society who actually benefit from all of the, and I'm pretty sure that's how communist China is right now. I'm pretty sure that's what communist Russia back in the past was. Every communist, I think if you go back and look, there was a controlling oligarchy that benefited immensely from the slavery and the oppression of their people.
I would agree. I think that people make a lot out of the personal property thing, and with everyone sharing everything in common in the New Testament, I definitely think it was a different time then. The church and the people of the church were persecuted and pursued, and not everybody had a lot. There were people that were starving. That there was really no point in having personal property because you were more concerned about helping people. And I think what it boils down to is it's not necessarily about I don't own this. It's about whatever I own, I'm willing to give to God.
Exactly.
Which I think is what James 1:27 is about when it says religion that is pure and undefiled before God and Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction and to keep oneself unstained from the world. This concept of justice, I think, for the believer, when we think about social justice, I think we need to separate it from the secular viewpoint of social justice and look at it through the lens of what God thinks is just. And what God thinks is just is that we care for one another, that we love one another, that we support one another. Perhaps one of the things that has collapsed, and this is just my opinion, I don't have any data to back this up, but in my own opinion, I think that when the state took over charity, the church lost its power.
Absolutely.
And when churches became lazy when it comes to charity, and when they became selective when it came to charity, that we began to lose our foothold in society. And as those things withered away, like we gave marriage over to the state, and now the state can license marriage, and it's all kind of the same kind of concept. It's like we were instructed by God to care for those that are less fortunate than us. That is social justice. It's got nothing to do with their station in life. It's got nothing to do with their race, their ethnicity, even their gender or gender preference, if you think that there is such a thing, right? All that really doesn't make a difference on how we treat a person with equity in the eyes of God. All men are created equal. Isn't that what our founding documents state? And so I think that, there's definitely a lot of room for improvement in our political system. But as far as believers are concerned, I don't think that we need to be afraid of the idea of social justice. I think that we need to embrace it, in not so much that it's defined as the redistribution of wealth and egalitarianism and communism, but that we want equity as far as society is concerned. And if that means we see someone being oppressed, then we support the oppressed, no matter who they are, whether they're black, white, red, yellow, whatever, right?
Well, that is the the whole discussion here today, right? What is social justice? What do we as a church, as Christians, as believers, how do we look at it versus what the media and the world is saying, what is social justice? And ours is biblically based, and yes, we love everybody the same. All men are created equal is what our Constitution says, but at the same time, the Bible states that as well.
Well, I'm going to be, I guess I'm going to have to disagree on this point, just because my stance would
Richard,
be, yes.
you disagreed with everything I've said, so I am so happy to be able to contribute to this talk.
I'm glad he's disagreeing with you.
No,
Maybe he's going to disagree with me too. I don't know.
Well, it is, because you've dovetailed off what Pastor Chris said. So this is a disagreement on both points, which is my thing, because I'm worried about equivocation, which is just a fancy word for using a word in two different ways. And I think my stance would be that we ignore social justice. We don't even say we support it because of the danger of equivocation, which is we say it and then it's said by someone else means something else. My thing is we support biblical justice, which is exactly what you gentlemen are saying it is, which is, fighting for the oppressed, reaching out for anybody of any race at any time, treating every man as he deserves to be treated based off his actions, etc. So my stance would be that we as Christians ignore social justice.
Well, if it's a matter of semantics, that I don't have a problem with that. I think that's a fair point. And you're right. You begin to utilize that. That's exactly what the secular world does to us. Is they change semantically the words that we utilize, and cults do that as well. Yeah. With terms like salvation and sanctification and grace and things like that. So semantics is important. I guess there's two ways to look at that. You could either ignore it, or you could try and take it back, which, at this stage, semantically speaking, there may not be a battle to take it back.
Well, I think the tsunami would be too difficult to.
And then if you take it back, what are you taking it back to? Are you just redefining it in the way that you want to redefine it then at that point? But I think the bottom line, I agree with that. I think that's a great conclusion, is this idea that we're not supporting social justice, we're supporting biblical justice and what that looks like. And we understand that not everybody is going to be in the same place at the same time. Equality of outcome is never going to be a thing this side of glory. Now, when we are all under the reign of the high priest, Jesus Christ, in heaven, God the Father reigning over us, then we will all be equal in creation under God. But even then, I think the Bible's pretty interesting in that it puts classifications on people, and that there are rewards equivalent to your works. And so even in heaven, there is a not an equity of outcome, even in heaven.
Right.
But there is inequality of opportunity.
Right.
And I think biblical justice calls for inequality of opportunity for all people to get the same help, to have the same salvation, to have the same Savior, to hear the same Holy Spirit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
You heard it here first, folks. Biblical justice.
I do want to circle back just one point. Just the equality of opportunity. I just want to say, because when I talked about private property, I want to ensure that you most definitely, as a Christian, if you decided to give all your stuff away in love and to share everything, you can't outgive God. So don't misunderstand the point I was making about personal property. And
in fact, you should give all of your stuff to Athol Baptist Church, P.O. Box.
I don't like horses.
That's a terrible thing to say, Richard. Come on.
That wasn't my voice. I think I'm on 3, so I'm lower. So, and then the last thing just is a pitch. Again, if you're listening to this and you are whatever bent you are, Wiccan, pagan, Viking, atheist,
Mormon,
Jehovah's
Witness, Satanist,
Satanists. I mean, seriously, anything
atheist,
where you can come and
Chevy
have
lover.
anarchist.
Ford lover.
Courteous. We're not looking to. We're not going to yell at anybody. We're not going to get in any rude. We just want to have a courteous conversation about different topics, and we will allow you to express your viewpoint, and we're going to ask questions, and we're going to have verbal challenges back and forth. So if you're interested in that, please contact Athol Baptist. You can find our website,
AtholBaptistChurch.org.
and we'll hopefully do these every month. We'd love to have, because we don't want to be an echo chamber. We want to get up here and we want to have real conversations with people. And so if you're interested in that, you have the courage to do that, please just call us and let us know.
And we can't yell at anybody.
We cannot yell. Cannot yell.
In fact, we want to do the opposite of that because we want people to come back.
Yes.
So yeah. So any closing thoughts, Greg?
I think that biblical justice starts here. I like that term. That's probably been coined before, but we as believers, we need to look at every person, as the Bible says, as better than ourselves.
That's a great exit.
So,
guys,
so practical, always. Just
yeah. Well, I mean, the Bible is pretty simple and practical, isn't it, most of the time?
Yeah.
All right. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Three Pastors Walk Into a Bar. I hope you've enjoyed it. And we really look forward to seeing you guys, or at least being a part of your lives next month. And thank you for inviting us into your home. Next month, we're going to be looking at possibly talking about worship, different types of worship. And I'm hoping to possibly have our worship leader, Tim Greenwood, in here to discuss and debate worship styles and the way worship looks in the church today. So that should be an interesting discussion. God bless you guys. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
Strangers are attacking me. Ruthless, they seek to steal my life. They have no regard for